My name is Goldie, and I have never fit into my family's ideas of what a normal daughter should be: easygoing, sociable, able to keep up a light conversation about fashion, new cosmetics, or another social event, while I have always preferred solitude and long hours in front of the monitor, immersed in the code that seemed I find him much more logical and predictable than the people around him. Sarah always reminded me how strange I was, emphasizing it in every conversation, as if my difference from her was something shameful or worthy of correction. "Goldie, you're such an oddball," she said, shaking her perfectly coiffed hair, which didn't have a single stray curl, as if she had just stepped off the cover of a magazine designed for girls who knew how to like. "All my friends think you're completely crazy." Sitting in my room and programming all day, her voice was always filled with a mixture of condemnation and pity, as if my fascination with something other than social events and endless communication was a diagnosis. I just shrugged my shoulders and continued typing, finding in this process a special calmness that conversations with her friends, whose views on life boiled down to discussing trends, new restaurants, and potential suitors, had never given me. The rhythmic clicking of the keyboard was a melody for me, and the lines of code were verses that I put together into whole works, controlling the world inside the program with the precision of a conductor. While Sarah was busy planning her next social event, where every detail, down to the shade of the napkins, mattered, I studied Python, Java, and C++, building the architecture of future programs in my mind, while my parents shook their heads in disbelief, not understanding what could be interesting in sitting staring at the screen for days on end. "Goldie, dear," my mother often looked into my room, her voice filled with concern, which she did not even try to hide. "Wouldn't you like to go out with your friends instead of staring at the screen all day?" I smiled, but I didn't try to explain that the friends I was really interested in didn't live in our city or even in our country. We chatted, discussed new programming languages, shared experiences, and supported each other. My parents never understood my passion for programming, but they couldn't argue with the fact that I had excellent grades and my teachers said I had a bright future. Sarah, of course, never missed an opportunity to make a sarcastic remark. "Well, at least you don't have to worry about guys who will distract you in college," she threw at me when she found out that I had enrolled in the computer science department with a full scholarship. I didn't say anything, because I knew it was useless to argue. She couldn't understand that for me, the world didn't consist of romantic dates and status parties, but of challenges that I threw at myself and solutions that I found where others didn't see the point. After graduating from university, I got a job at a leading mobile app development company, and although my salary was higher than I could ever have imagined, I was in no hurry to brag about it. I knew exactly what would happen if my family found out. Sarah would immediately be at my door with her hand outstretched, and my parents, not wanting to look insensitive, would look at me reproachfully if I refused to help. So I kept quiet, lived in a modest rented apartment and saved every penny, dreaming one day to move out of town, away from the noise of the city, gossip, and other people's expectations. I imagined a house with large windows, surrounded by a dense forest, where I could work remotely, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee and listening to the silence. But life has a strange habit of interfering with our plans, throwing up unexpected challenges, and my challenge came in the form of a phone call from Sarah. "Goldie." Her voice, filled with fake enthusiasm, sounded over the speaker. "I'm getting engaged. And yes, before you ask, you're invited too." I sighed, gripping the phone tighter in my hand. Jake, her fiancé, was probably the only decent guy she'd ever brought into the house. I didn't understand how such a decent man could end up with her, but despite all our differences, I sincerely wished them happiness. However, I noticed a certain tension in her tone, as if she would prefer not to call me at all, but probably my mother insisted that the family should be together. "The engagement party will be at Lou Blanc next month," she continued, and then her voice hardened, taking on a familiar note of disdain. "And please, for God's sake, dress like a normal person. No t-shirts, no jeans. And please do something about your hair. You know what makeup is, right?" I rolled my eyes, glad she couldn't see my reaction through the phone. "Yes, Sarah," I know what makeup is, I replied with restraint. Great, she drawled, and there was satisfaction in her voice, as if she had just tamed a wild animal. Then I'll see you there. I looked at the screen of my dead phone and sighed. It seems that my plan to avoid social life has failed again. On the weekend after Sarah's call, driven not so much by desire as by a sense of duty, I visited my parents' house, which, as I soon realized, turned out to be a huge mistake, because as soon as I crossed the threshold, I found myself in the thick of the wedding fever, which seemed to engulf the whole house, filling it with a pile of glossy magazines, pamphlets, invitation cards, and endless conversations about decor, menus, and the guest list, while the father, who looked like he had just been overwhelmed by the cost of all this madness, he looked sadly at the impressive stack of catering catalogs in front of him. "Oh, Goldie!" Mom exclaimed, without even looking up from the magazine, which, apparently, discussed the fashion for wedding dresses this season. "Sarah told you about the engagement?" "Yes, she did," I replied, walking into the kitchen, where the light scent of fresh pastries reigned, but even it could not drown out the nervous excitement that literally soaked every surface of this house. I sat down at the table and automatically reached for an apple from the bowl, hoping that at least this simple gesture would help me maintain my remaining composure. "So how much will it all cost?" Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair, as if he had a premonition that my skepticism might provoke another argument, and cautiously replied, as if he wasn't entirely sure whether to tell me the details at all. "Well, we're thinking of taking out a loan." I almost choked on a piece of apple, and it took me a couple of seconds to make sure that I really heard those words correctly. "Hello?" I raised my eyebrows in disbelief, feeling indignation begin to boil inside. "A wedding loan? Why not use that money for something practical, like a down payment on their first home?" Mom looked at me as if I had just offered to arrange a celebration at a local fast food store, and at the same time replaced the wedding cake with a box of donuts from the nearest supermarket. "Goldie, honey, you just don't understand these things," she sighed, putting down the magazine and folding her arms over her chest in a manner that always meant she was preparing for a long lecture. "You spend all your time on your computers, you don't even have a boyfriend. Every girl dreams of a perfect wedding day." "Every girl except me, apparently," I muttered, bringing the apple to my mouth to hide a skeptical grin. "Exactly." Mom threw up her hands in exasperation. "You don't understand women's affairs at all. When was the last time you went on a date?" I restrained myself from retorting that there was no point in telling them about guys who felt uncomfortable around me because I earned more than them, or about those who expected me to give up my career as soon as the relationship got serious. Instead, I took a deep breath and spoke calmly. "I just think going into debt for one day is too much." "Well, no one asked for your opinion." Sarah's voice came from behind me, and I didn't even hear her come in. I slowly turned to face her and met her cold, haughty gaze, which showed obvious irritation. "Some of us actually care about making memories and having nice things," she said with emphasis, folding her arms over her chest as if challenging me. "And some of us care about financial responsibility," I retorted, looking her straight in the eye. "God, you're such a bore." Sarah rolled her eyes as if I had just informed her that the wedding would take place in the basement. "That's why you're still single. Everything should be logical, practical, and rational. Where is the romance? Where is the spontaneity? Probably where your common sense is," I muttered to myself, but of course Mom caught the subtle note of sarcasm and immediately gave me a warning look. "Goldie, if you're only going to be negative, maybe you should go home," she said, crossing her arms over her chest and making it clear that my point of view doesn't mean anything in this house. I stood up, suddenly feeling how tired I was of all this, of the endless expectations that I didn't meet, of the reproaches, of the comparisons. "Maybe I should," I said, heading for the door. "Good luck with your loan applications." When I went outside, my footsteps echoed down the path, and in the house behind me, through the open window, I could still hear animated voices continuing to discuss the wedding. I couldn't help wondering if they would even notice if I decided not to attend the engagement, but I knew I had to go, if only to prove that I could be normal whenever I wanted. The month flew by faster than I expected, and on Sarah's engagement day, I really made an effort to meet the standards that my family thought I should have met. I bought a navy blue dress that cost more than I usually spend on clothes for the whole season. I even went to the salon and let the craftsmen work on my usually disheveled hair, allowing them to style it so that each strand lay perfectly, without a hint of the mess that was a familiar part of my image. Looking at my reflection in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. In front of me stood a woman who looked like she had always lived a life that my family approved of. A taxi dropped me off at Le Blanc, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, and without even going inside, I could already imagine how grand and impractical the whole event was. Sarah rented an entire restaurant solely for the sake of her engagement, which made my mind shudder at the thought of wasting money that could have been invested in something more worthwhile, like the same house that she and Jake could have bought instead of wallowing in debt for one evening. When I walked inside, I immediately felt the festive atmosphere, literally saturated with brilliance and luxury. There were huge bouquets of fresh flowers everywhere, the cost of which probably numbered in the thousands of dollars. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light on immaculately set tables. Waiters with perfect posture glided smoothly between the guests, pouring champagne, which, judging by it, seemed to be pouring like a river, and the restaurant itself resembled a shot from a movie. About the lives of people for whom money has no meaning. The guests had already broken up into small groups, each of which seemed to have found entertainment to their liking. Sarah's college friends were huddled around the bar, constantly giggling, taking selfies and discussing someone with exaggerated animation. Jake's family occupied several tables at the entrance, their faces expressing a proper impression of the level of organization of the evening, and my parents, as I expected, moved around the hall with welcoming smiles, fulfilling their social mission, introducing people to each other and discussing the future wedding with such enthusiasm, as if it were not just a ceremony, but a national event. I looked around for a card with my name on it, assuming that I would be seated at the family table, where, as the bride's only sister, I should be. I looked through the tables at the entrance, then moved to the center of the room, checking each card, but I still couldn't find my name. A feeling of unease began to creep into my soul as I had to get further and further away from the main area, but even there I did not find my card. Trying to keep my cool, I went up to my mom, who was having an animated conversation with a woman who was obviously Jake's relative, and after waiting for the conversation to end, she asked me which table I had been assigned to. Mom glanced at me briefly, looking me up and down with a look in which I caught a mixture of surprise and something else. Was it a disappointment? Even in an expensive dress, with professionally styled hair, and even after making every effort to look decent, I still didn't meet her standards. "Oh," she muttered, looking around nervously, as if checking to see if anyone was eavesdropping on our conversation. "Your table is over there." She casually pointed to the farthest corner of the room, partially hidden in the shadows, where the light from the chandeliers barely reached the surface of the tables. I froze, slowly shifting my gaze to the indicated place, and for a moment it seemed to me that I had misheard. Everything went cold inside, but I didn't let that feeling give me away. As I got closer, I saw a table for 6 in front of me, with only one chair behind it, and a card with my name on it. I looked at her, feeling as if I had been punched in the stomach. The air suddenly became heavy, and the noise of the party was muffled, as if I were standing behind glass and watching the celebration of life from the sidelines. "What the hell, Sarah?" I muttered, turning on my heel, overcome with both anger and bitterness. I found her quickly, surrounded by her bridesmaids, who were cooing around her, looking at her wedding ring and making enthusiastic noises. "Sarah, can we talk in private?" I asked, trying my best to keep my voice level. She rolled her eyes, showing by her whole appearance that she wasn't interested in me at all, but still deigned to follow me to a quiet corner. "What is it, and please don't make a scene," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "The stage?" I barely managed not to raise my voice. You put me alone, at a table in the corner, like some kind of outcast, and you're afraid that I'll make a scene? Oh, come to your senses, Sarah snapped, sighing irritably. What did you expect? You're a total loser, Goldie. All my friends think you're weird, and I don't want Jake's family to have to deal with your quirks. I felt my stomach tighten at those words. Do your friends think I'm weird because I'm successful? Because I don't post every little detail of my life on social media? Or is it because I don't live off my parents? She snapped, contempt in her voice. Because you care more about computers than people. Her voice grew louder, attracting the attention of nearby guests. I wanted to answer, but before I could say a word, Mom appeared next to me, her face expressing a mixture of fatigue and discontent. What's going on here? I turned to her, feeling the anger that had been building up until that moment give way to a desperate need to be heard. Sarah just called me a loser and a freak, I said, hating the treacherous tremor in my voice. Mom's face froze as if made of stone. Goldie, stop making a scene, she said in a flat but cold voice. It's your sister's special day. Just go sit at your desk and try not to draw attention to yourself. I looked at them, at these two women who, according to all canons, were supposed to be my family, support me, take care of me, love me unconditionally, and not only when I met their expectations, and I felt something inside me finally break, split, like ice cracking under a weight. It's been too long a winter. Was it painful? Yes. Was it unexpected? No. Without another word, I turned around and headed for my lonely table in the corner, feeling every step pressing down on me, feeling an emptiness in my chest. I sat at this table for exactly 30 minutes, not a minute more, watching Sarah and Jake officially announce their engagement, as my parents beamed with pride, as if the whole evening was dedicated solely to their own achievements, as all the other guests clapped, laughed, clinked glasses, congratulated each other, as if the conclusion this marriage somehow made their lives brighter and better. I looked at all this from the outside, like a person who was not invited to participate, but only graciously allowed to attend, but in whose opinion no one was interested. I was waiting for the moment when one of them would at least glance in my direction, when Mom would realize that something was wrong, when Sarah, albeit with her invariable dismissive smile, would come up and ask why I looked like I wanted to disappear. But that didn't happen. No one noticed me. No one noticed how slowly I got up, how I picked up my purse, how quietly I headed for the exit, sliding between the joyful guests who did not see me at all as part of this evening. Or maybe someone noticed, but they didn't care. The taxi ride home was a blur, and as soon as I stepped into my apartment, I kicked off my shoes, not even bothering to put them neatly in the closet, then pulled off this expensive dress that cost me a month's budget for casual wear, and finally took a deep breath. I changed into what I was really comfortable in, my usual jeans and a soft t-shirt, which Sarah despised so much, considering them a symbol of my refusal to conform to a normal life. And then I did what I always did when I needed to deal with my emotions. I started programming. Hours turned into days, days into weeks, and I threw myself into my work, plunging into the code as if into a life-saving element, taking on additional projects, closing deadlines one by one, earning impressive bonuses that settled on my bank account, increasing its balance as rapidly as my desire decreased when or try to be part of your family again. Contacts with her parents and Sarah quickly faded away. No calls, no messages, no visits. It was as if they had erased me from their lives, and the most amazing thing was that I felt no pain from it, rather relief, because I no longer expected anything from them. I did not hope that one day they would accept me for who I am. That's when I decided to stop waiting and start living the life I've always dreamed of. I opened my financial documents, looked at my account balance, recalculated all my savings, and realized that I had more than enough money for the down payment on the house, and my salary would easily cover the mortgage. There was only one thing left, to find the perfect place. I contacted a realtor named Lisa, and there was friendly curiosity in her voice when she asked what exactly I was looking for. A single, family house, preferably in a secluded location, but with a good internet connection because I work remotely, I explained, sketching out the perfect picture in my mind. And the complete absence of nosy neighbors. Lisa laughed. I think I know what will suit you. She was right. The house turned out to be perfect, modern but cozy, with a spacious terrace surrounded by dense trees, with huge windows overlooking a small pond, and a neat study in which the previous owners had already installed high-speed internet. I'll take it, I said without even thinking. The purchase process went surprisingly smoothly, without delays, without unexpected difficulties, and after a few weeks I already had the keys to my new house in my hands. I told exactly 2 people about this, my best friend from college, who was genuinely happy for me, and my supervisor, who nodded approvingly when he heard that now I would have an even more comfortable place to work productively. My family didn't need to know about this. They lost the privilege of being a part of my life the very moment they sent me into the shadows at Sarah's engagement party. I moved in gradually, first setting up a home office, then, step by step, filling the rooms with a comfort that now belonged only to me, feeling for the first time in my life that I was finally in my place, without drama, without judgment, without having to justify who I am. But peace, as it turned out, was a luxury that my family did not allow me to enjoy for too long. 2 weeks after I had fully settled into my new home, my phone lit up with an incoming call with a familiar number. Mom. I stared at the screen, as if hoping that it would suddenly go off, that it was just a mistake, that she hadn't really called me. But the call continued, and with a sigh, I finally pressed the answer button. Goldie, we need to talk. Her voice was stern, without a hint of kindness. Come home tomorrow afternoon. Your sister will be there too. I should have known right away that something was wrong. I had to ask why, after weeks of silence, they suddenly needed my presence. After weeks of silence, I should have asked questions. I should have at least asked why they suddenly decided they needed me again, but I didn't, and as it turned out, it was in vain, because as soon as I agreed to come, I drove myself right into the trap they had prepared for me. When I turned into the driveway of my parents' house, the first thing that caught my eye was Sarah's bright red convertible parked right in front of the entrance, as a reminder that she was always put first. This car was a gift from her parents in honor of her graduation from college, just one of the many gestures they invariably use to demonstrate who in our family they consider worthy of encouragement, care, and attention. I parked my sensible, practical hybrid behind him, took a deep breath, briefly closed my eyes to collect my thoughts, and, making sure that my calm mask was in place, went inside. As soon as I stepped through the door, I knew something was wrong. They were already waiting for me in the living room, lined up like a tribunal ready to pronounce a guilty verdict. My mother with an impenetrable but clearly displeased expression on her face, my father with the look of a man who is forced to do something unpleasant, but considers it necessary, and Sarah, whose face shone with the self-satisfaction that she always exuded when she thought that she managed to catch me off guard. Sit down, her father said stiffly, pointing to the only empty chair in front of them. I slowly sat down on it, crossing my legs and folding my hands in my lap, but an analytical mechanism was already working inside me, calculating possible scenarios. What could have caused this sudden interest in my person? I had no doubt that this was not just a meeting for the sake of communication, so the reason must be serious. What's going on? I asked in a flat voice, although I already felt a slight tension inside. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with barely concealed triumph. There was something almost predatory in her gaze, like a cat catching a mouse. Why don't you tell us about your new home, Miss Successful Programmer? I froze, feeling a chill run down my spine for a split second. How did they find out? I didn't tell them. I didn't post photos, I didn't post on social media, I didn't share with anyone except 2 people I trusted. And then it dawned on me. Lisa, I said, not asking, but affirming. Your friend Lisa is my realtor. Bingo. Sarah clapped her hands sarcastically, tilting her head to the side, as if mocking my slowness. Imagine my surprise when, during a normal friendly conversation, she mentioned that she had helped my sister buy a beautiful country house. Mom immediately picked it up. My daughter lives in a modest apartment, but somehow buys herself a country house, although, as far as we know, she never has extra money to help her family. I opened my mouth, but she continued without giving me a chance to object. We know, Goldie. We know how much you earn. We know about your bonuses. We know you've been lying to us all this time. The word lied hit me like a slap in the face, but after a moment, anger swept away the first shock, forcing me to stand up, almost knocking over my chair. I didn't lie about anything, I said sharply, looking directly at my mother, then at my father, then at Sarah, who was smiling smugly. I just didn't consider it necessary to share my financial information with you. These are two different things. It's the same thing. Sarah snapped. You've been hiding from us, living like a hermit, deceiving everyone, making them think that you barely have enough to live on, while you have enough money to buy houses. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. When was I supposed to tell you about this? My voice sounded calm, but there was icy sarcasm in it. At your engagement party? When did you put me in a corner so no one could see? Sarah's eyes flashed, but before she could respond, her father raised his hand for silence. Goldie, the point is that you've never shown any interest in helping your family. His voice was tired but firm. We're taking out loans to pay for your sister's wedding, while you're buying a country house. Interest in helping? I exhaled, feeling a wave of indignation wash over me. When have any of you shown interest in my life? They exchanged glances, but no one hurried to answer. You never came to see me, I continued, not letting them interrupt. You have never asked me how my work is going. The only thing you said was that I sit at my computer all day long. The only time you pay attention to me is when you need something from me. It's not like that. Mom exclaimed, but her voice was drowned out in the onslaught of chaos when everyone started talking at once. We could use help with Sarah's college education. Mom left. I needed a new car last year, but I didn't ask for it, my father added. The deposit for the wedding venue is a huge amount, Sarah said. Their voices overlapped, sounding like background noise, like an endless reproach for not giving enough, sacrificing myself enough for the sake of my family, for their comfort, for the well-being of my sister, who has always, since childhood, got the best. I looked at them, heard every word, but with every second I felt something inside me quieting down, like the once burning desire to be accepted, to be important to them, to be significant not only when something was needed from me. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't try to convince them anymore. For the first time in my life, I clearly understood that I was not a person for them. I was a resource, a wallet, a convenient backup option that could be counted on in difficult times. And most importantly, I realized that I no longer wanted to be a part of this game. I raised my hand, silencing them, and at that moment something inside me completely changed. I no longer felt the need to justify my success. I no longer felt guilty for managing my money the way I saw fit. I was no longer going to explain myself to them as if I had committed a crime only because I had managed to get out of their endless circle of expectations and debts. I'm leaving. I turned around, preparing to leave the house, but Sarah's voice, sharp but at the same time sweetly cloying, immediately cut through the tense silence. Wait a minute. I stopped without turning around, already knowing in advance what was going to happen, but still hoping for a miracle, for something else, something real. We didn't really invite you here to argue over your secret wealth, she continued with an exaggerated lightness that sounded like carefully concealed demands. I turned to her, afraid of what I would hear next. Sarah smiled, but it was far from sincere, and something flashed in her eyes that made a wave of disgust rise inside me. Since you can afford country houses. Her voice became as sweetly soft as her expression. You can pay for my wedding. I froze, and then I felt laughter rising from the depths of my chest. Not joyful, not cheerful, but the kind of hysterical that breaks out when the situation becomes so absurd that the only alternative is to cry. Are you kidding me? Sarah jumped to her feet, her face contorted with indignation, her lips twitched, betraying her growing rage. No, I breathed, wiping the corners of my eyes. Above you. You owe us. She snapped, taking a step forward, her eyes flashing with hatred. I looked at her, studying her expression, her posture, her clenched fists, and suddenly realized that I wasn't feeling anything. No anger, no pain, no desire to prove anything, just emptiness and the final realization of who we had been to each other all this time. I don't owe you anything, I said, my voice deadly calm, icy, devoid of emotion. Especially after the way you've treated me all our lives. Just like you treated me. Sarah squealed, clenching her fists. You are the one who lived a lie, hiding your success from your family. I turned to her, folding my arms across my chest. You're right, Sarah, I'm successful. I paused, waiting for her evil gaze to meet mine. I'm the loser who can afford to buy a house. And you know what? Losers don't pay for their successful sisters' weddings. The look of shock on her face was worth all the drama. Goldie. Mom gasped, clutching her chest as if my words were a fatal blow. How dare you throw such words at your sister? Her voice was both shaky and full of reproach. Why not? I turned to her. She meant everything she said when she cornered me at her engagement party. She meant everything she said when she called me ugly, weird, and crazy. So why shouldn't I tell the truth? I turned around and walked to the door, ignoring their protests, reproaches, accusations, because this time they had no meaning for me. Before leaving, I paused for a moment, turning around one last time. Do you know what's funny? I grinned, looking at them, these people whom I once wanted to call family. If you had ever shown a genuine interest in my life, if you had ever treated me as a loved one, and not as a disgrace that you have to hide, perhaps I would really want to help. They were silent. But you made your choice, and I made mine. I left without waiting for an answer. When I returned home to my beautiful new home, for the first time in a long time, I felt lighter than I had in recent years. For the first time in my life, I realized that I was no longer dependent on their approval, their views, their expectations, and that I no longer had to fight for a place in their world. But as it turned out, the universe wasn't done testing me yet. The next day, as I was setting up my new home office, sorting documents, and setting up my desk, a loud, demanding knock on the door rang through the house. I glanced at the monitor, on which the window of the video surveillance system was open, and, of course, I saw Sarah standing on the porch with her face contorted with anger, clutching a stack of papers in her hands. I was in no hurry to open it. She took a deep breath, giving herself a few seconds to prepare for the inevitable, then went to the door and unlocked it, but did not take a step back, remaining standing in the doorway, blocking her way inside. What do you want here? I asked, not hiding my irritation. Sarah shoved the papers into my hands, almost threw them at me, as if they were something I was supposed to be in awe of. This is a list of wedding expenses, she said with a hint of impatience in her voice. The deposit for the venue needs to be paid next week. I slowly looked down at the documents, but I didn't even bother to pick them up. The numbers I saw made me smile inwardly. The amounts were impressive enough to make a down payment for another house. And you're showing me this because? I looked up at her. Because you're going to pay for it, she said, as if she were explaining something obvious to a child. I stared at her for a few seconds, and then I laughed again. Sarah, I said, wiping away the tears of laughter. You don't deserve anything from me. Mom and Dad are waiting for this. She screamed, clenching her fists. This is what I deserve. Do you deserve it? I asked, shaking my head. After treating me like I'm trash all my life? Sarah's face contorted with rage. She turned around and, abruptly descending from the porch, shouted, "You know, you are not invited to my wedding." I grinned after her and said calmly before closing the door, "Don't worry. I wasn't going to come anyway. I already know which table you're going to put me at." I thought that this would be the end of everything, that after the scene on the porch and the final breakup with my family, I would finally be given peace, but I was wrong. The next few days turned into a real flurry of calls, messages, and attempts to contact me through all possible intermediaries. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly felt an overwhelming need to talk to me, inundating me with long tirades about family unity, sisterhood, and the need to support each other. Apparently, Mom wasted no time spreading her vision of the situation, exposing me as a heartless egotist who hid her fabulous wealth from them and refused to help her own sister when she needed it most. At first, I just ignored it, but after 3 days of constant attacks from all fronts, my patience began to give out. Every notification on my phone brought another message, from which I either rolled my eyes or experienced an outburst of anger, and Linda, whom I hadn't seen since school, wrote that I was destroying the family. Cousin Mike, with whom I hadn't spoken for 5 years, suddenly had a firm opinion about my duties to relatives. Even my mom's friends from her bridge club found me on social media to tell me how sorry I've become so callous. I was sitting in my home office, staring at the monitor screen, where messages were piling up, one more ridiculous than the other, and thinking about how easy it is for people to judge you without knowing the slightest truth. But I knew every problem has a solution. You just need to find the right algorithm. I took a deep breath, opened my social media accounts, and started typing. Since there seems to be some confusion in our family about recent events, let me clarify the situation. At my sister's engagement party, I had no place among the family and guests. I was seated at a separate table in the darkest corner of the restaurant, as if I were not a welcome relative, but a problem that needed to be hidden from prying eyes. When I asked why, my sister called me a pathetic loser and said she was ashamed of me. My mother supported her and told me not to make a scene. A few weeks have passed, and now that my family has found out that I am successful in my career, the same sister who was ashamed to put me at the same table with her friends suddenly demanded that I pay for her wedding in full. My parents, who had never taken the time to come into my apartment all this time, suddenly decided that they had the right to know everything about my finances. And now a question for all the relatives who write to me about their debt to their family. Where was this concern for family unity when I was hidden at family events? Where were those messages of support when I was called a freak for choosing my career? I bought my house with the money I earned with my own work. I don't have to finance other people's life decisions. The end of the story. I reread the text, made sure that it reflected the essence of what was happening, and clicked publish. She leaned back in her chair and braced herself for the consequences. They came faster than I expected. But not the way I imagined them. The angry messages and reproaches stopped almost instantly. Instead, my cousins and sisters, people I barely knew, started writing to me, sharing their stories about Sarah, about her arrogant behavior, how she took advantage of other people's kindness for years, how she made people feel guilty in order to get what she wanted. It turned out that I was far from the only one she humiliated and used, and my story only encouraged others to speak up. And then my phone rang. Mom. I clicked reject. A minute later, it rang again. Sarah. I clicked reject. Dad tried to call me next. I refused again. They kept switching between their phones, even trying to call from unknown numbers, hoping that I would accidentally answer. I've blocked them all. And that's when there was a knock on my front door. I looked at the surveillance camera screen. Mom, Dad, and Sarah were standing on my porch. Sarah was shouting something. Her face was red with anger. Mom was crying. Dad looked confused, as if for the first time he realized that everything had gone too far. I pressed the speaker of the speakerphone system built into the door, another technical convenience that I installed to avoid dealing with uninvited guests. Go home. I have nothing to say to any of you. Goldie, let's just talk. Mom sobbed, grabbing Dad's hand, but he didn't take a step toward me. Do you want to talk now? I grinned, watching their reactions through the screen. After all these years when I was ignored, when I was ridiculed, when they tried to shame me into paying for Sarah's wedding? No, thanks. You're destroying this family. Sarah screamed directly into the camera, her hands shaking with anger. I couldn't help but laugh. No, Sarah. You and Mom and Dad destroyed it many years ago. I just finally stood up for myself. I turned off the speaker and watched them discuss something among themselves for a few more minutes, and then they turned around and slowly walked to the car. I watched them drive away and felt nothing but calm. They stayed on my porch for more than an hour, alternating threats with pleading requests, trying to intimidate me or soften my heart, hoping that one of their arguments, whether "you betrayed your family" or "we are your parents after all," would finally break my resolve. I continued to work, letting the noise-canceling headphones drown out their voices, turning their insistent demands into barely audible background noise, which soon ceased to have any meaning for me. Finally, they left, but not before Sarah, in a voice trembling with rage, shouted through the door that I was definitely not invited to her wedding, saying these words as if this was supposed to be the ultimate punishment for me, the most terrible punishment, the final expulsion from the family that I had never known. She belonged. But life is moving forward, regardless of whether you are ready for it or not. I heard from my aunt that in the end, my parents, despite everything, still took out a huge loan to pay for Sarah's wedding, not wanting to accept that their youngest daughter might have something less grandiose than her friends. My mother had to give up weekly skin care procedures, and my father postponed retirement because the loan payments turned out to be much more serious than they expected, but even sacrificing their own comfort, they continued to tell everyone who was willing to listen to the story of an ungrateful daughter who refused to help her sister arrange the wedding of your dreams, or at least the version of it that you could afford with a bank loan. I've seen the photos on social media. The wedding looked exactly like hundreds of other similar celebrations, expensive, intricate, completely devoid of personality. Expensive dresses, immaculately set tables, Sarah's artificial smile in every picture, frozen in that perfect pose that she probably practiced in front of the mirror to look perfect in the photos. I even noticed that someone else was now sitting at the corner table where I sat at her engagement party, a woman who, as I later learned, had committed another unforgivable sin in the eyes of the family. She had divorced a year earlier, becoming another disgrace for them. My online advertising keeps me up to date on family news, even if I've never asked for it. I know that my parents had to significantly reduce their usual lifestyle in order to cope with the payments on the wedding loan. I know that Sarah constantly complains that her modest wedding is my fault, conveniently forgetting to mention exactly how she treated me all these years and why I eventually decided to have nothing more to do with them. As for me, I'm thriving. My home has become my refuge, a place where no one tells me what I should be like, a place where I feel truly free. I have set up an ideal home office equipped with the latest technologies, which my team is delighted with. Now I can hold virtual meetings without background stimuli, without the constant feeling that I need to prove my worth to someone. I even started mentoring young programmers in my free time, especially girls who, like me, choose computers over conformity and are not afraid to go their own way, even if this path makes them weirdos or white crows in the eyes of others. I received another wedding invitation last week, but this time it was completely different. One of the girls I mentor is getting married to her girlfriend, and her conservative family refused to attend the ceremony. Will you sit at the family table? What is it? She asked me, smiling a little sheepishly. You're more of a family to me than they've ever been. I agreed without hesitation. Because sometimes the family you were born into is not the family you'll end up with. Sometimes the white crow in the family is not the one who has problems. And sometimes sitting alone at a table in the corner is the first step to finding your own place in the world. As for my parents and Sarah, I'm sure they still tell everyone who listens to them about their terrible daughter and sister, who refused to pay for the wedding, turned into an egotist and turned her back on the family. But now I know that their opinion of me doesn't define who I am. My value is not measured by their acceptance or their rejection of me. I'm Goldie, a programmer who bought her own house, built her own life, and finally learned to stop apologizing for not fitting in with other people's ideas of what I should be. And I wouldn't want it to be any other way.